Hesiod's Theogony and Works Days are the foundation of Greek mythology, and many people read them for that reason. It's wildly entertaining to read about these all-powerful gods and the reality TV show of their lives, who's sleeping with or feuding with whom. But beneath the insanity of these stories, these are powerful poems. Taken together, they're only 61 pages long, but they contain stories that are referenced in almost every single major work in ancient Greece. In the same way that the Quran unlocks appreciation of the Arab world, and the Bible unlocks appreciation of Renaissance Europe, the Theogony unlocks our appreciation of ancient Greece. The poems by Hesiod and Homer give us the spiritual and cultural belief system that dominated Europe for 1,000 years. You have in here some of the earliest musings on economics and philosophy, and the cosmic germinations of our most primal impulses for lust and war. There are few books packed this densely with this much important information. So I'm going to keep going with this video as long as it takes to get every last drop out of this. And it's worth it, because everything we're going to read together, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the histories of Herodotus, and so much more, they're all in some way in conversation with the myths that fill these pages. I'm going to do this in 3 parts. I'm going to introduce the author, Hesiod, then I'm going to cover the Theogony, then Works Days. There are 2 foundational poets in ancient Greece, Hesiod, who we're talking about today, and Homer, who we're talking about in the next lecture. And they're so intertwined with each other because they're writing around the same time, 700 BC. We don't know who's writing first, and we don't even know if Homer was a real person. He gives us 0 personal information. Scholars call it the Homeric question. Who was Homer? There's no Hesiodic question, though. We know Hesiod was a real person because it gives us some personal details. He tells us he won a poetry contest once, and the entirety of his second poem, Works Days, is addressed to his deadbeat brother, Perses, who Hesiod accuses of stealing more than his fair share of the family inheritance and wasting his days in idleness. The most significant elements of these Hesiodic poems are the myths they tell us. And I think there's a bit of an eye roll from adults reading these myths because they're probably familiar with them through children's books. The Percy Jackson books, for example, are wildly entertaining retellings of many of these same myths. People living today, we have a different relationship with these myths because we see them as fiction. As time goes on, an intellectual elite forms in Athens. This is a few hundred years after Hesiod. These famous philosophers we've all heard of, Socrates, his student Plato, and his student Aristotle. These philosophers teach their followers to think rationally about all aspects of life, politics, physics, and morality. This intellectual elite probably thought the myths were savage and not to be interpreted literally, but they still recognized the role the gods played in everyday life. Socrates, the philosopher who kicks off this pursuit of rationality and runs around Athens questioning everybody and everything. He's sentenced to death, and his last words are asking his friend to sacrifice a rooster to Asclepius, the god of healing. Even Socrates, the most skeptical man in Athens, believes in the gods of Hesiod and Homer. This is why I'm covering Hesiod before Homer. Homer's epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, are meant to entertain. The gods are characters themselves in the poems. They fight alongside the heroes of the Trojan War. Homer alludes to the myths of these gods, but he doesn't always stop to tell us the stories, because he's writing for Greeks who have lived with these stories their whole lives. The Theogony and Works Days are such gifts for us because they're didactic poems, teaching poems. They're written to present these myths in a compact format, so they're the perfect pre-read for Homer and all the great Greek writers who followed him. So Hesiod gives us the earliest, straightforward tellings of these myths, but he didn't invent them. There's a whole rabbit hole of scholarship about the origin of these myths, but the current thinking is that they're as old as 4000 BC, so 3,300 years before Hesiod writes his poems, and that these myths originate in modern-day Ukraine. The roots of these myths are so old that they're first told in a language that predates any of the modern languages, an Indo-European language, so it's called, because it's a language so old it comes from a time when the peoples of Europe and India spoke the same or a similar tongue. Many of the big modern languages of the region come from this common root. Greek, Latin, German, Farsi, and Sanskrit all come from this same root Indo-European language. You can actually observe this in how you say Zeus in these languages. His formal name in Greek is Zeus Pater, for Zeus the Father. In Latin, he's Jupiter, which sounds similar to Zeus Pater. And in Sanskrit, the liturgical language of Hinduism, it translates as Dios Pita. Again, sounds similar. But we don't have any of these earlier tellings of the myths. We have Hesiod. And that's because Hesiod's innovation telling these myths, and the reason we're talking about him today, is because he's the first person to write them down. And he was really on the cutting edge of his time being able to do that, because he writes these myths exactly around the time that the Greek alphabet is adapted from the Phoenicians. After thousands of years of oral tradition, Hesiod writes them down. And today, thousands of years later, we get to read them. Herodotus, the first historian, who we'll read together later this summer, credits Homer and Hesiod with constructing mythology. It was these who constructed a divine genealogy for the Greeks, and who gave the gods their titles, allocated their powers and privileges to them, and indicated their forms. A brief note about the translation. I'm reading from the Oxford World Classics edition, translated by M.L. West. It's a free verse translation. It doesn't follow a precise meter, which I think suits the didactic nature of the poems. He isn't fussing around with the language. In the original Greek, Hesiod writes in the same dactylic hexameter verse as Homer, with each line consisting of dactyls and spondees. So there would have been a rhythm to the poems when they were recited aloud. But nobody translating these poems in English worries about trying to match this exact meter. They're informational poems, so let's get to the information. Section 2, Theogony. Hesiod begins the Theogony with an invocation to the Muses. It's standard in Greek epic poetry for the rhapsode, the poet who's performing this in front of a crowd, to call up to the Muses, these daughters of Zeus and inspirational deities, to help the poet with the feat of memory, to recall the words of the poem, and to deliver these words with the beauty they deserve. Hesiod's Theogony begins not just with this invocation to the Muses to give them strength, but he actually puts the Muses in the first scene of the Theogony. He begins with a story in the first line of the poem, telling us that they visited him while he was minding his business and tending his flock. And they told him to sing of the family of blessed ones who are forever. He's beginning with this to assert his authority, that he was chosen by the Muses to reveal the divine genealogy of the Olympians. Now, this isn't quite the same thing as the Gospels in Christianity. The Theogony is not scripture. It's not thought to literally be the word of God, put to paper by man. And although Hesiod says he was inspired by the Muses, nobody views him as a prophet. He does not speak for the gods. It's not to diminish the importance of the Theogony and its influence in Greek society, but it's important for us to know that this isn't a religious document in the same way that the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran are. And so Hesiod gives us the genealogy of the gods, which is often referred to as the succession myth, because it gives us the story of how each of the 3 generations of gods overthrows their parents to claim cosmic supremacy for themselves. And if you haven't heard this before, buckle up, because this is a very weird story. The story begins with the primordial beings. In the beginning, there was chasm, chaos in Greek. But its meaning is more like chasm, a void, nothingness. And from nothingness sprung Gaia, the primordial being of the earth. And from Gaia's depths, Tartarus, the primordial being of hell. Fourth was Eros, the primordial being of desire, which makes generational reproduction possible. And the description of Eros reads as a description of love itself. And Eros, the most handsome among the immortal gods, dissolver of flesh, who overcomes the reason and purpose in the breasts of all gods and all men. What a description of the feeling of love, the thing that melts the flesh and supersedes all reason. Gaia's first child is Uranos, the primordial being of the heavens, whom she reproduces with to create the next generation of gods, the Titans. The 12 Titans are the sons and daughters of Uranos and Gaia. They include Oceanus, the ocean, who the Greeks believe wraps around the earth. Themis, the Titan of order and justice, memory. And the youngest of the Titans is the one who will be known as crooked, scheming Kronos. Gaia and Uranos also give birth to 6 non-Titans, 3 Cyclopses, and 3 100-armed monsters. Uranos, the primordial being of the heavens, loathes his children and shoves them inside a cavern of Gaia. This is obviously frightening for the Titans and painful for their mother. Gaia produces an adamant stone and fashions it into a reaping hook and asks her children who would use it against their father. All the Titans fear their father except Kronos, crooked, scheming Kronos, who answers the challenge. He slices off his father's genitals and flings them across the earth. The drops of blood give birth to the giants, and the Furies, these winged goddesses who punish crimes of blood. They do this, of course, because they're birthed from the first great blood crime. And they prowl the earth, extracting a blood price from all those who commit the foulest crimes. These characters, the Furies, have changed my relationship with that word in English. To have fury is to seek a blood price. And from the flung genitals falls semen, which churns to white foam in the sea and gives birth to Aphrodite, whose name comes from Aphros, which means foam in Greek. Aphrodite is the first of this final generation of gods, whom we call the Olympians, because they ultimately rule from Mount Olympus. There is a physical Mount Olympus in Thessaly, but the Mount Olympus of the gods is more of a heavenly realm. Aphrodite is commonly known as the goddess of beauty, but Hesiod's description is so much richer. Her province is the whisperings of girls, smiles, deceptions, sweet pleasure, intimacy, and tenderness. There's such a youthfulness and innocence to this language. Her domain is the sweet adolescent yearnings of women. With his father Uranos overthrown, the Titan Kronos rules the heavens and the earth. Throughout the Greek poems, we see characters referred to with epithets, short descriptions to tell us about their character. We see this in the Iliad with Achilles. He's swift-footed Achilles or brilliant Achilles. When the poets refer to Kronos, it's always a variation of crooked, scheming Kronos. He liberates his mother and his brothers and sisters from his father. But there's something dishonorable about how he does it and what he does with his power. Kronos and his sister Rhea reproduce. There's an unfortunate theme here, if you haven't caught on yet. And they have 3 daughters: Hera, the goddess of women and marriage; Hestia, the goddess of the hearth and home; and Demeter, the goddess of the harvest. And they have 3 famous sons: Poseidon, Hades, and Zeus. So Kronos rules the cosmos, and his mother and father, Gaia and Uranos, tell him he's fated to be overthrown by his son. So he begins swallowing his children as they're born. Their mother Rhea gives Kronos a rock in a baby cloth to swallow instead of Zeus, and she hides Zeus in a cave in Crete. This legend is part of why there's such a strong cult worshipping of Zeus in Crete, because they believe Rhea hid him there as a child. Zeus grows strong in hiding, and he emerges to challenge his father Kronos and the other Titans. A 10-year war breaks out between the gods of Olympus and the Titans, and it's called the Titanomachy. Zeus frees the 3 Cyclopses and the 3 100-armed monsters who had been imprisoned by their father Uranos and kept there by their brother Kronos. The 100-armed monsters fight for him against the Titans, and the Cyclopses forge his famous thunderbolt. And with this thunderbolt, Zeus is unstoppable. Hesiod gives us a description of the absolute devastation of Zeus and his thunderbolt. And it's unbelievable to me how similarly it reads to the imagery we all know and fear today of a nuclear explosion. The hot blast enveloped the chthonic Titans. The indescribable flames reached the divine sky. And the sparkling fire of the thunderbolt and the lightning dazzled the strongest eyes. Zeus and the Olympians prevail, and they lock the Titans in the pit of Tartarus, and they dispatch them below the wide-pathed earth, and bound them in painful bondage, having defeated them by force for all their pride. As far below the earth as heaven is from earth to misty Tartarus. For 9 nights and days a bronze anvil might fall from heaven, and on the 10th reach the earth. And for 9 nights and days a bronze anvil might fall from earth, and on the 10th reach Tartarus. So they banished the Titans to this place that is as far below the earth as the heavens are above it. And we get a description of Tartarus and the areas around it. A vast chasm whose floor a man would not reach in a whole year if once he got inside the gates. But storm wind upon terrible storm wind would carry him hither and thither. It is a cause of fear even for the immortal gods, this marvel. The gates to this terrible place are forged by Poseidon and guarded for eternity by the 100-armed monsters. And with the Titans locked away, Zeus begins his unopposed reign. There are 3 themes I draw from this succession myth that influence the world our Greek heroes, authors, and philosophers live in. The first is that power wins. Kronos overpowers Uranos, and Zeus overpowers Kronos. And Zeus so powerfully defeats the Titans that the other Olympian gods, Zeus's brothers and sisters, they never seriously consider challenging him. It's power that wins Zeus his throne, and it's power that lets him keep it. This world of brutal realism is the world of ancient Greece. There are unthinkable wars. A 30-year war between Sparta and Athens. A 2 million person army of Persians led by Xerxes that march on King Leonidas in the famous 300. The Greeks believed that the domain of the gods was won by force, and so too will they win the domain of man. The second theme is the relationship between kingship and order. After ascending the throne, Zeus swallows Metis, the goddess of wisdom, to physically ingest and rule with her wisdom. And he marries Themis, the Titaness of order and justice. And even as he takes other wives, Themis still sits beside him at council on Olympus. Zeus is all-powerful, and the other Olympians don't always agree with him, but he breaks the cycle of evil that ruined his father and grandfather. With absolute power, Uranos abused the Titans. With absolute power, Kronos swallowed his children. With absolute power, Zeus institutes justice and order. Because of him, mortal men are unmentioned and mentioned, spoken and unspoken of, according to great Zeus's will. For easily he makes strong, and easily he oppresses the strong. Easily he diminishes the conspicuous one and magnifies the inconspicuous. And easily he makes the crooked straight and withers the proud. Zeus brings balance to the cosmos, and this balance actually sounds familiar to Christians from the Beatitudes in the Gospels. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the world. There's a natural appeal to these ideas, that there's a supernatural being who honors those who struggle. So Zeus brings order to the gods by giving them each their domain, and he apportions honor to men in accordance to fate. He also brings truthfulness by instituting the oath of the gods, sworn on the river Styx, the river that flows through the underworld. And we see this oath all the time in the Greek classics. Each time one god must make a promise to another god. They swear it on the river Styx. Hesiod tells us that the penalty of breaking an oath sworn on Styx is 1 year in a coma, deprived of ambrosia and nectar, the food and drink of the gods. Then 9 years in exile, cut off from the gods. This justice, order, and fairness that Zeus enforces across the cosmos gives him his soft power. The Olympians can't overthrow him because he's too powerful, but they don't want to overthrow him because he's so just. The idea of a benevolent kingship, a leader who rules with absolute authority but justly, it's a critical idea in Greek culture. Many of us, when we're school children, learn of the famed Athenian democracy. the mythic Theseus, whom I've made a previous video about, united the tribes of Attica into a united Athens, and he institutes the first democracy. And Athenian democracy flourishes in the age of Pericles. But the famous Greek philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, they all see democracy as an inferior form of government. Socrates, the father of Greek philosophy, is executed in a trial by his peers for fictitious charges of corrupting the youth. This mob rule is what we see in the trial of Socrates. That direct democracy, directly putting power in the hands of the common man, is foolish, because the common man cannot deal in justice and order and truthfulness in the same way that a truly great king can. Plato, a young student of Socrates, who sees his teacher executed by the democratic mob, writes later in life his most famous work, The Republic, in which he tries to construct an ideal city where this doesn't happen, where you don't condemn people unfairly, where you have order and justice. He calls this city Callipolis, the beautiful city. But he has to answer a specific question. If not democracy, what? And his answer is that a just society is best ruled by a singular philosopher king, an extraordinary individual who has trained their whole lives to uphold justice, keep the city ordered, and administer the city in such a way that promotes the well-being of its citizens. Plato was not a religious fanatic, and he prides himself on the exercise of reason. Yet it's uncanny that in a society that lives on these myths, Plato, the great philosopher, reasons his way to an all-powerful king that has this sense of benevolence in common with Zeus, and shares this altruistic desire to uphold justice and order for the greater well-being. The third theme is the fear of being overthrown. The succession myth establishes a clear pattern of sons overthrowing their fathers. Kronos overthrows Uranos. Zeus overthrows Kronos. So Zeus takes it very seriously each time he hears a prophecy that he will have a son who will be greater than him. We get one of these episodes in the Theogony after Zeus takes his first wife, Metis, the goddess of wisdom. The primordial beings Gaia and Uranos, Zeus's grandparents, they prophesy that Metis will have two children, a daughter with wisdom and courage to equal her father, and a son who will rule gods and men, and in doing so, overthrow Zeus. Zeus doesn't want to roll the dice and risk getting overthrown. So as Metis is about to give birth to their first child, Zeus swallows her. He ingests her wisdom in this way and thinks the problem solved. No wife, no child. But months later, Zeus has a mind-splitting headache. Zeus begs one of the other gods to split his head open with an axe, and the goddess Athena bursts forth from his forehead. Zeus loves Athena for her cunning and her ferocity in battle, as the prophecy told, that he would admire his daughter's wisdom and courage. So no son is born, and Zeus isn't overthrown. I've already mentioned Zeus's marriages to Metis, the goddess of wisdom, and Themis, the Titaness of order and justice. But Hesiod gives us a detailed catalog of each of Zeus's 7 wives. As you've probably realized, the family tree of these gods is completely insane. So there's no point in trying to memorize any of this. Just to show you how insane it is, I'm going to find one online and put it on the screen right now. You don't need to know all the names and relationships to enjoy the other great works of ancient Greece. You'll hear these names 1,000 times if you read the classics. Hear them now in relation to Zeus. After Themis, there's Eurynome, daughter of Oceanus, who births the 3 Graces, goddesses who emit love and beauty. Then Demeter, goddess of the harvest, who births Persephone, fated to rule alongside Hades as queen of the underworld. Then Mnemosyne, the Titaness of memory. She births the 9 Muses, goddesses of inspiration, song, and poetry. Then Leto, a Titaness without cosmic domain, who births the twins, Artemis and Apollo. Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, and Apollo, the god of prophecy, the arts, archery, and with the power to heal or unleash plague. And finally, Zeus's 7th wife is Hera, the goddess of womanhood and marriage. She births Hebe, the goddess of youth, Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, Ares, the god of war, and Hephaestus, the blacksmith of the Olympians and the god of fire. And I dwell on this list of wives and children to reinforce two things. The first is the incestuousness of this family, which heightens the drama between the gods. They're all related to each other in some way, multiple ways in some unfortunate cases. We're going to see this interconnectedness of this family and the alliances and rivalries between the gods in a dramatic way in Homer. The second is the incredible window to the soul Hesiod gives us for Hera. In so many of the Greek classics, we see Hera portrayed as wrathful. She harbors such incredible anger, and she uses her own powers and her proximity to Zeus as his queen to unleash hell on her enemies. The Hesiodic and Homeric vision of the Olympian gods is that they're anthropomorphized. They behave and feel in ways that are human. So when we see Hera in the Iliad so inconsolably raging, we can have some empathy imagining what it must be like to sit as queen alongside Zeus as his seventh wife, surrounded by his exes and the children he produced with them. Zeus tells us of Hera's rage in Book 4 of the Iliad. Insatiable Hera, how great are the pains that Priam and Priam's sons have heaped on you, that you rage on, relentless, forever bent on raising the well-built heights of Troy. Only if you could breach their gates and their long walls and devour Priam and Priam's sons and the Trojan armies raw, then you just might cure your rage at last. And so Hera lives with this inconsolable rage, a rage she turns towards Troy in the Iliad. And these Hesiodic myths continue in Works and Days. The poem, Works and Days, by Hesiod, is titled, and may seem on the surface like a how-to guide for agriculture. And the middle section of the book does talk about how to run a good farm, if you're into that thing. But Works and Days is really a compendium of the poet Hesiod's musings on life, which fall into four categories. Category 1, the myths. Hesiod expands on the myths from the Theogony with Prometheus. He's a second-generation Titan, so his father, Iapetus, is Kronos' brother, and fights along his side in the Titanomachy. Prometheus is cunning, and he's constantly vexing Zeus, then bearing the consequences. As we'll see in each of these works from ancient Greece, the Greek heroes and humans of this time believe in the importance of sacrifices to honor the gods. Sometimes they sacrifice with a specific purpose, to bless a voyage, for example. Other times, they sacrifice to their favorite god, almost to build a relationship with them. And the consequences are serious, as we'll see in the Iliad. The gods treat men differently who honor them with great sacrifices. There are two types of sacrifice, we'll see. The Greeks pour out wine onto the floor to honor the gods with drink. And we'll see them burn a portion of an animal each time they consume meat. So one day, Prometheus asks Zeus which he would prefer to eat, a fine cut of meat or a bone with fat on it. And he enhances the bone and the fat to look extra tasty. Zeus picks the bone. And so Prometheus, who has this special connection with man, he has man sacrifice bones to the gods forever, not meat. And this is the mythic story of why we see these men throughout Greek literature burn bones and fat each time they have a banquet. Zeus is upset about this because he'd rather have the best cut of the meat, and now he's just getting the bones. He was tricked. So as retribution, he makes it impossible to start a fire on Earth because you can't burn bones without fire. And this is where we get the famous myth of Prometheus, giving fire to man. Prometheus steals fire from Mount Olympus, the home of the gods, and he gives it to man. Zeus is livid and must exact punishment. He chains Prometheus to a rock and sets a giant eagle on him. The eagle, as the most majestic bird, is always a symbol of Zeus. And this giant eagle feeds on Prometheus's immortal liver, which regenerates each day, only to be eaten again the next. And Prometheus is chained to this rock for years until he's freed by the demigod hero Heracles. But Zeus also punishes man for accepting the fire of Olympus. While Prometheus is chained to the rock, he's left his brother Epimetheus in charge. And he warns him, never accept a gift from Zeus, lest some calamity befall mortal man. Unfortunately, Epimetheus is a total idiot. So when Hermes, the messenger god, comes with a gift, Epimetheus impulsively accepts it, and then he regrets it. Prometheus literally means forethought. Pro, before, like prologue, and metis is thought. So Prometheus is forethought. And epi means after, like epilogue. So Epimetheus means afterthought. And that fits the symbolic telling of the story. So what does Epimetheus accept? What gift has Zeus sent to curse mankind? Woman. The first woman, Pandora. She's the essence of woman, molded from the earth by the Olympian inventor Hephaestus. Hephaestus led her out where the other gods and men were, resplendent in the finery of the pale-eyed one, whose father is stern. The pale-eyed one is an epithet for the goddess Athena. Both the mortal gods and mortal men were seized with wonder when they saw that precipitous trap. More than mankind can manage. For from her is descended the female sex, a great affliction to mortals, as they dwell with their husbands, no fit partners for accursed poverty, but only for plenty. As the bees in their sheltered nests feed the drones, those conspirators in badness, and while they busy themselves all day and every day, till sundown making the white honeycomb, the drones stay inside in the sheltered cells and pile the toil of others into their own bellies. Even so, as a bane for mortal man, has high thundering Zeus created women, conspirators in causing difficulty. So maybe Hesiod was fighting with his wife or something when he wrote this. This is obviously crazy, but this is the myth. The great curse to mankind is women. So this first woman, Pandora, opens her jar. It's not a box. It was mistranslated in the Renaissance. The Greek word is jar. Pandora opens her jar and unleashes all evils on mankind. This is the punishment for the fire of Prometheus. For formerly, the tribes of men on earth lived remote from ills, without harsh toil and the grievous sicknesses that are deadly to men. But the woman unstopped the jar and let it all out, and brought grim cares upon mankind. Only hope remained there inside her secure dwelling, under the lip of the jar, and did not fly out, because the woman put the lid back in time by the providence of Zeus, the cloud gatherer who bears the Aegis. There's so much here. We're going to spend some time with this quote. And the poetry here in translation from West is extraordinary. Pandora's been sent by Zeus with a jar containing all evils. This is an idea we see elsewhere in the poems. I think it's in Book 24 of the Iliad, when Homer's commenting on the fate of each man. He says that Zeus has two jars on Olympus, one with blessings and one with curses. And he apportions these to each man, some more blessed, some more cursed, to preserve the cosmic balance. So Zeus has given Pandora a jar similar to this, filled with curses to unleash on mankind. Only hope remained there, inside her secure dwelling, under the lip of the jar, and did not fly out. What's the myth telling us about hope? It's not very clear. There are three main interpretations of this line. The first is that hope is actually an evil. That's why it's in the jar of evil. And Zeus holds back this evil of true hope. The second is that hope is a good thing. And to punish humanity further, Zeus does not release true hope into the world. The third interpretation, and the one that the publisher, Oxford, puts forth in the endnotes, is that it's just unclear writing, that hope is a good thing, and merciful Zeus unleashes hell on humanity, but preserves hope for them. Who knows what Hesiod meant? But I like the poetry of this last interpretation, and I'm feeling optimistic today. And that's the fun of some of this. We just don't know. So when we read it, our interpretation can tell us as much about ourselves as it tells us about the author. When you read some of these passages, you feel a similarity with creation myths of other religions. This language here, for example, for formerly the tribes of men on earth lived remote from ills, without harsh toil, and the grievous illnesses that are deadly to men. But the woman unstopped the jar and let it all out, and brought grim cares upon mankind. This language evokes the Old Testament and the fall of man in the book of Genesis. A carefree life, and then the first woman does something. The first woman, Pandora, opens the jar. The first woman, Eve, eats from the forbidden fruit. And then humanity is doomed to suffer. There's a parallel here. There are similarities to Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden in the Theogony too. On the far western edge of the world, there's a sacred garden with a sacred tree that bears golden apples of immortality. And this garden is protected by a snake. And again, this sounds an awful lot like the book of Genesis. The sacred garden in the myth, like the Garden of Eden. The golden apple of immortality, just like the apple of divine knowledge. The snake that guards the tree in the Greek myth, and the snake that tempts Eve in the book of Genesis. The scholarly interpretation here is that the author of the book of Genesis didn't copy the Theogony, or the other way around. They were both written around the same time. This similarity in the myths of a tree of life, the apple and the serpent, the earliest mention of it is actually in the Epic of Gilgamesh, a Mesopotamian poem, which is the earliest surviving work of literature. It's at least 500 years older than the Theogony. So the working theory is that there was some common mythic tradition in this region from the Mesopotamians that Hesiod and the author of Genesis borrowed from. But who knows? I just find it so much fun to think about how foundational the story of Adam and Eve is to Judeo-Christians, and how foundational Pandora's jar is to ancient Greeks. And it's so fun to imagine who that long-lost poet may have been in Mesopotamia, who actually came up with the garden, the serpent, and the apple tree in the first place. Hesiod gives us one final great myth in Works and Days, the myth of the ages of man. On the surface level, this myth gives us the history of mankind. It speaks of the first men created by the gods from gold. And these golden age men were very close to being gods themselves. And with each successive age of man, there are 5 ages, men became less like the gods and more like the men who walk the earth today. This is an allegory, a story that means something on the surface level, but tells a deeper story too. That deeper story is of civilizational decline. It's the observation of the poet, surely agreed upon by the people he recited to, that the society they found themselves in 700 BC, was worse than the society of their ancestors. And the power of this feeling of civilizational decline is that 2,700 years on, the way Hesiod puts his finger on the rancor and unpleasantness in society, it feels true for readers even in modern times. So the myth begins with the golden age of man. When you hear someone refer to the best of times as a golden age, people say it was a golden age of literature, or the golden age of Manchester United. This is where that expression comes from. I'm going to give you many of the descriptions straight from Hesiod here, because the language is just so good. The race of men that the immortals who dwell on Olympus made first of all was of gold. They were in the time of Kronos, when he was king in heaven, and they lived like gods with carefree heart, remote from toil and misery. Wretched old age did not affect them either, but with hands and feet ever unchanged, they enjoyed themselves in feasting, beyond all ills, and they died as if overcome by sleep. All good things were theirs. It's a utopic vision of man, physically made of gold, spending their days in leisure, unaffected by the pains and indignity of aging. And when it comes time to die, they die peacefully, as if falling asleep. Their time is the reign of Kronos. But when the time comes for this age of man to end and a new age to begin, Zeus honors these golden men by deifying their spirits to watch over successive generations of mortal men. The second age of man is the Silver Age, the first created by Zeus and his Olympian brothers and sisters. These men of the Silver Age are much inferior than the Golden Age men, Hesiod tells us, and he describes them as man babies. For 100 years, a boy would stay in the care of his mother, playing childishly at home. But after reaching adolescence and the appointed span of youthful manhood, they lived by a little time and in suffering because of their witlessness. So their children, for 100 years, swaddled by their mothers. Then they become men, walk outside, and suffer in stupidity. And why do they suffer? Because they cannot stop themselves from committing crimes against each other. This is the first time that we see discordance between men. They dishonor each other with crime, and they dishonor the gods because they do not sacrifice to them. And so Zeus covers them in the earth and tries again with the Bronze Age men. Hesiod tells us these men are made of bronze, but the raw material comes from ash trees. And as we'll see in the Iliad, the ash trees are used to fashion the spear shafts of the most fierce warriors. And this is fitting, because this is an age of man consumed by violence. Out of the ash trees he made them, a terrible and fierce race, occupied with woeful works of Ares and with acts of violence. So the evilness we see in the Silver Age of man with their criminal proclivities is even amplified in the Bronze Age, despite Zeus starting over. They're occupied with the woeful works of Ares, the god of war. And Hesiod tells us they were laid low by their own hands, and they went to chill Hades' house of decay, leaving no names. Mighty though they were, dark death got them, and they left the bright sunlight. These words are so good. They're laid low by their own hands, meaning their war undoes them. They kill each other in war. This age of man isn't wiped out by Zeus. They wipe themselves out. And mighty though they were, they went to Hades leaving no names. This is a hint of moralizing in the myth here. These Bronze Age men were glorious, mighty warriors, but they went to the underworld leaving no names. It's telling us that nobody cares to remember the names of these men for their strength in wars. That glory in war is not what we value. It's not how you're remembered. And finally, this fourth time, Zeus gets it right. The next stage is the age of heroes. After trying and failing to fashion men out of silver, and trying and failing with bronze, Zeus and the gods of Olympus create the age of heroes by directly mating with mortals. This is the definition of a Greek hero. They're demigods, half-gods, born of one mortal parent and one godly parent. Achilles, Heracles, Theseus, Perseus, all of these men are heroes. One god parent, one mortal parent. Hesiod tells us that these heroes are our predecessors on the boundless earth. This is what the ancient Greeks believe, that we are descended from the demigods and from their parents. We are descended from the gods. And this is something we see used to political effect. These great leaders like Priam, the king of Troy, who isn't a demigod himself, he's just a regular man, but he claims his family lineage 6 generations ago is descended from Zeus. There's a divine right of authority that some of these men claim from their lineage. There's also, again, this loose strain of commonality in the myths with other religions. The direct descendants of humanity from the gods has this Judeo-Christian similarity of a belief that humans are made in the image of God. And what do these demigods do in this glorious heroic age? They go to war with each other. Hesiod tells us that ugly war and fearful fighting destroyed them, some below 7-gated Thebes as they battled for Oedipus's flocks, and others it led in ships over the great abyss of the sea to Troy on account of lovely-haired Helen. So there are two battles that wipe out these heroes. The first is the battle at Thebes, which we'll get to later this year with the famous Oedipus Rex story. Oedipus is the king of Thebes. And the second is the Trojan War, which we're covering next month when we read the Iliad. When we read the Iliad, we see that almost everything in the story is fated by the will of Zeus. It's one of the first lines of the poem, and the will of Zeus was moving towards its end. And this is one of the key questions in the Iliad. We have 16,000 lines in that poem of heroes slaughtering each other. And what's the point? What is the will of Zeus? Many readers later in ancient Greece and in Roman times, and then in more modern times, take this passage from Works and Days that this is his will. Hesiod names Thebes and Troy as the wars that eliminate the heroes. Zeus puts these two wars into motion as a way to sunset this age of heroes and bring about the final age, the age of the common Greek man, and the same age of man that walks the earth today, the Iron Age. Remember, this is an allegory about civilizational decline, and Hesiod here is giving us the end, the complete disarray of society that he felt when he was writing. For now, it is a race of iron, and they will never cease from toil and misery by day or night, in constant distress, and the gods will give them harsh troubles. Nevertheless, even they shall have good mixed with ill. Yes, Zeus will destroy this race of men also. One will sack another's town, and there will be no thanks for the man who abides by his oath, or for the righteous or worthy man. But instead they will honor the miscreant and the criminal. Law and decency will be in fists. The villain will do his better down by telling crooked tales and will swear his oath upon it. Men in their misery will everywhere be dogged by the evil commotions of that envy who exults in misfortune with a face full of hate. Those grim woes will remain for mortal men, and there will be no help against evil. We're doomed to work day and night in constant distress. We'll have some good mixed in with the bad, but make no mistake, Zeus will destroy us too. And what will that destruction look like? Lawlessness. One will sack another's town. Lying. No thanks for the man who abides by his oath. Will glorify criminals. And the only law of the land will be force. Law and decency will be in fists. And what feeling will these men have in their misery? Envy. Envy of those with more and lust to take it for ourselves. This is the great payoff of this myth. It's these lines that people have read for 2,700 years about what the end of times will look like. The complete anarchy right before Zeus wipes us off the face of the earth. And no matter what year the reader's living in, he looks outside and thinks this is it. Category 2, beginnings of economic and philosophical thought. Hesiod is actually addressing this poem, Works and Days, to somebody, Perses, his dirtbag brother. Hesiod says that Perses sits around all day doing nothing. Idleness is the word he uses. And what's worse, Perses is swindled more than his fair share of the family inheritance. Using corruption and bribery, he's stolen from his brother Hesiod. So Hesiod is trying to motivate his brother to be a good man and not such a deadbeat. And this motivates Hesiod to share observations which feel like economics and philosophy. I don't want to overstate the poem here. This isn't even close to the reason economic or philosophical arguments we'll get from authors who live later. But I still think it's worth it acknowledging this, because Hesiod is giving us observations here that will be proven true later. In Greek mythology, strife, conflict, is personified. Strife is the goddess of conflict. And Hesiod notes that strife makes us feel envy of our neighbors. And this envy motivates competition, which helps us to produce more. Strife rouses even the shiftless one to work. For when someone whose work falls short looks towards another, towards a rich man who hastens to plow and plant and manage his household well, then neighbor vies with neighbor as he hastens to wealth. This strife is good for mortals. There's the economics of competition here, that we don't want to be outdone by our neighbor. And so healthy competition between individuals is good for producing more. There's also such irony here, because we just finished discussing the myth of the ages of man, and how the end times brought on by Zeus would be filled with envy, and this envy would cause conflict. But here, Hesiod is telling his deadbeat brother that a little envy isn't a bad thing. It'll get him off the couch to work for himself. I'd call this proto-economics, before economics. It's an idea Hesiod has, which will be proven correct many centuries later, about the competitive motivation of the individual, which increases the total output of an economy. He has another line in the poem that made me laugh out loud when I read it, because it feels like some quote you'd see from these hustlers on Instagram. Inferiority can be got in droves, but in front of superiority, the immortal gods set sweat. Put that on your gym wall. It's a similar thing in philosophy. Hesiod ranks the needs of man. He doesn't make a direct analytical argument, but he makes an observation about the hierarchy of needs. The psychologist Maslow popularized this in the 1900s. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we'll see this thought get shaped by Plato and Aristotle. But this observation of it is right here in Hesiod. Little business has a man with disputes and debates, who has not food for the year laid up at home in its ripeness, produce of the earth, Demeter's grain. He's telling us that food is a more urgent need than debate. This is obvious. But he's also implying here that men may get more delight out of disputes and debate than they do out of basic sustenance. That engaging in debate is the reward for satisfying your basic needs. This is a big idea that we're going to see in Plato and Aristotle, that the great joy of humanity, the ultimate good, what it means for us to flourish, they use this word eudaimonia, is to exercise the rational part of our minds by questioning everything and engaging in debate. Socrates has the famous quote, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Again, I'd call this proto-philosophy, before philosophy. Hesiod isn't giving us an argument, but he's making an observation that while the needs of the body are most urgent, the true joy in life comes from satisfying the needs of the mind. Category 3, best practices in agriculture. Who cares? There's no hidden meaning here. But if you want to read the earliest instructions on how to plow a field, that's in here too. Category 4, superstitions. Okay, you've stuck with me this far, and this is our little dessert at the end of this journey through Hesiod. He gives us these really funny superstitions, and I just want to read you one of them, my favorite. And never urinate in the waters of rivers that flow to the sea or at springs. Avoid this strictly, nor void your vapors in them. That is not advisable. Void your vapors. He's telling us not to fart underwater, lest we dishonor the gods. So, read Hesiod and don't fart underwater.